1980s Topps football cards, 12 most valuable. Life must have been easy for 1980s Topps football cards. I mean, they were pretty much the only game in town for collectors who wanted to see their gridiron heroes on little swaths of cardboard. Unless you count the Fleer team issue, which was sort of cool, but not really, at least not all the time. And there were a lot of the 1980 Topps cards to collect too, with a checklist of 528 players strong. These things must have sold themselves. Yet they aren't so plentiful today that they fall into the abyss of mass overproduction that plagued pretty much every set from the late 1980s well into the 1990s. So while these cards may never scale the heights of their pricier baseball cards, they're still plenty desirable to collectors. That's especially true of these 12, the most valuable 1980s Topps football cards, as determined from PSA 9 prices listed in the PSA Sports Market Report Price Guide. See our description for the Price Guide link for current prices. Let's start the clock. 1980 Topps Lester Hayes, rookie card, number 195. Hayes was a main cog in the Oakland Raiders' defensive backfield for a full decade, even when they moved to Los Angeles. From 1977 through 1986, Hayes perturbed opposing receivers with his aggressive, high-contact bump-and-run style of coverage that netted him 39 interceptions and 4 touchdowns in his career. He also recovered a fumble for another touchdown, and for his efforts, Hayes owns 2 Super Bowl rings. 1980 Topps Jack Lambert, number 280. Jack Lambert first took the field as a Pittsburgh Steelers linebacker in 1974. That was the first season for a young Lynn Swann, too. The year before, they had gone 10-3, but lost in the divisional round of the playoffs to the Raiders. But with the youngsters in tow, the Steelers became the Steelers in 1974 and took home their first Lombardi trophy. 3 more followed by the end of the decade, with Lambert backing up the famed Steel Curtain line and nabbing 9 Pro Bowl and 6 All-Pro selections along the way. Canton came calling in 1990, ensuring that Lambert's cardboard would remain among collectors' favorites for decades. 1980 Topps Walter Payton, number 160. For Chicago Bear fans and anyone who loves the underdog, Payton was the man to root for in the 1970s and early 1980s. The man was the greatest running back many of us had ever seen, and he seemed humble, and he ran behind a series of offensive lines that were holier than a hunk of Vatican-blessed Swiss cheese. Yet sweetness kept plugging along with the mediocre Bears teams until everything gelled under Mike Ditka in 1985. By then, Payton was turning the corner on a legendary career and had long since cemented his legacy in the game and in the hobby. 1980 Topps Phil Simms, rookie card, number 225. Phil Simms had a lot of pressure on him coming out of Morehead State as the first-round pick of the New York Giants in 1979. I mean, what kid can be expected to lead a once-proud football powerhouse back to prominence, especially under the glare of the New York spotlight? Well, Phil Simms, apparently. After struggling for a few years, and after a 1983 season in which he played in just 2 games, Simms put together a monster 4,000-yard effort in 1984. 2 years, he and linebacker Lawrence Taylor led the completed turnaround as the Giants won the Super Bowl. That forever marked Simms as a star. 1980 Topps Clay Matthews, rookie card, number 418. Modern fans may think of Green Bay Packers standout when they hear the name Clay Matthews, but that guy is actually the third in line of defensive Clay Matthewses. No, not that kind of defensive, the football kind. Grandpa played as a defensive end/defensive tackle for the San Francisco 49ers for 4 years in the 1950s. Then Dad inserted himself into the Cleveland Browns linebacking corps in 1978 and didn't step out until 1993. At which point he stepped into the fray for the Atlanta Falcons. When the middle Clay Matthews finally retired in 1996 at age 40, he was a 4-time Pro Bowler and a linebacking legend. 1980 Topps Jack Ham, number 10. Ham was already in the midfield of Steelers defense when Lambert arrived, and the former Penn State standout was a key part of Chuck Noll's plan to build out a championship team in the early 1970s. That all went to plan, of course, and Ham developed into an 8-time Pro Bowler and 6-time All-Pro who landed in the Hall of Fame in 1988. 1980 Topps Steve Largent, number 450. For a while there in the late 1980s, Steve Largent was considered by many to be the greatest receiver of all time. Certainly he had the numbers to back up that claim, what with having hauled in the most receiving yards and touchdowns ever. Of course, even then, Largent could hear the footsteps of young wolves like Chris Carter and Jerry Rice stalking his marks. Others like James Lofton, Marvin Harrison, Terrell Owens, Randy Moss, and more would also surpass the Seahawks' great. But Largent was a groundbreaker, whose gridiron exploits pushed his cards to the forefront of the hobby, and his 1980 Topps second-year card remained strong. 1980 Topps Bob Griese, number 35. By 1980, Bob Griese was an aging superstar who missed out on most of the Dolphins' perfect 1972 season due to a broken ankle, but who still had the reputation of winning most every time he touched a football. Was a lot of that success due to the team around him? Probably, but Griese was a Miami celebrity back for one more go-around with a team that was already in transition. To wit, young David Woodley started 11 games at quarterback that season, relegating Griese to just 5 appearances and 3 starts. So this is the card that greeted collectors all through what must have been a very long 8-8 season in South Florida. 1980 Topps Rocky Bleier, number 61. Rocky Bleier once had a promising career ahead of him as a halfback for the Steelers. That was back in 1968 before he was drafted over the winter. Bleier then spent most of 1969 in Vietnam as a grenadier, an assignment that put him in harm's way and specifically into the path of a sniper's bullet and a nearby landmine. That combination inflicted serious injuries to both legs and put an end to his NFL career. Except Bleier wasn't done. Instead of quitting, he went to the Steelers camp in 1970 and pushed on through several years of cuts and non-starts to finally land a full-time role with the team in 1974. Right, another 1974 influx of talent. From there, Bleier rode his legendary grit to a 1,000-yard season in 1976, making him one of 2 Steelers, Franco Harris being the other, to crash the barrier in the bicentennial year. Though he's not in the Hall of Fame, Bleier's compelling story is tough to resist. 1980 Topps Terry Bradshaw, number 200. Before he became maybe the most colorful guy in the game, Bradshaw was a gritty quarterback who led the Steelers to those 4 Super Bowl championships in the 1970s. He fit right into the smash-mouth image of that team and forged his Canton bust in the fire of the old AFC Central Division. Today, Bradshaw is as popular as ever. 1980 Topps Tony Dorsett, number 330. By 1980, Tony Dorsett was a household name across the nation. That tends to happen when a former Heisman Trophy winner with Pitt in 1976 assumes the mantle as the highest profile player on the most beloved/hated team in the land, the Dallas Cowboys. Dorsett rode those wheels of his to more than 16,000 all-purpose yards, 90 touchdowns, and an enduring place in collectors' hearts. 1980 Topps Carl Eller, number 189. There aren't a ton of stats available from the 1960s and 1970s to tell us about the defensive stars of the day, but we have other things, like nicknames. The Purple People Eaters, for instance, were the Minnesota Vikings defensive unit that helped the team win 10 division titles in 11 seasons, from 1968 to 1978. Carl Eller was the defensive end for that group, and he was feared across the land. We have other indicators too, like All-Pro and Pro Bowl selections. Eller picked up 5 of the former and 6 of the latter. So yeah, dude was a Hall of Famer in the making, and that's been an official designation since 2004, even without a Super Bowl ring. Like our video? Then like our video and subscribe to our channel. waxpackgods.com